I work with a lot of people when I'm treating them in the physiotherapy room or out in the gym floor that have knee pain. And it's one of those really frustrating things that hold a lot of people's training back, whether they're trying to push up some training volume to build some muscle mass, or they're trying to add some weight onto the bar to build some strength. It becomes this point which really just limits people's ability to progress, because in the back of the mind, they can feel the pain, they know that something's not working right, and they're like, well, how do I fix this? You know, I've tried conventional stretching. I've tried some simple drills to make it better, but nothing seems to make it stick. Now, the thing with knee pain is you'll often have periods of time where you don't feel anything at all, and then there'll be a period of time where it gets really, really aggravated for a pretty extended range of time. And the problem with that is once it gets really reactive and it gets super painful, it starts to feed itself. There's nothing that you can do from a training standpoint that basically doesn't hurt it. Doesn't matter if you're doing a lower body workout, whether you're doing a squat, whether you're doing a deadlift, whether you're doing a step up, it doesn't matter. Everything starts to get painful. So what we need to do is have a little bit of a framework of how to look at dealing with the knee specifically. And part of that is actually looking past the knee. It's looking at the hip, it's looking at the ankle, and then it's looking at how we actually train the knee itself. Now, the knee in theory is actually a pretty simple joint. It's just a hinge joint that sort of bends and straightens out. So it really isn't that complex. But I think a lot of the time, one side is we just don't actually train it well enough. And then two, we let muscle imbalances get in the way of actual proper function of the knee itself. So today's video is a very simple guide that you can use and implement into your training that will help get your knee into a position that feels better long-term and keep things moving well. So just to give a bit of context to start off, often if we look at the quad in itself, this part of the knee does way too much work, and not in a good way. It's constantly getting pulled and tugged on because we've got these tissues that are up here that are really, really short. We've got an inability to actually access the back of our hip. So what ends up happening is this just stays super bunched up and tight, and then this part of the knee just gets pulled on constantly. So there's a muscle that crosses the knee and the hip, and it often gets really, really tight at the top and then lengthened and stretched at the bottom. So what happens over time, that becomes painful, and then you get inflammation around the knee itself. So we need a strategy to deal with that. So the hip specifically, and then the other side is the ankle. We need to make sure that we've got enough range that we can get your knee over toe. Now, we don't actually need a huge amount of range here, but often what happens is we do build up tension in the calf and in the foot, which then starts to limit range of movement. So the first thing that I would do is you don't need a crazy amount of weight. You just use your body weight and focus on getting your knee pushing over your toe. Now, this looks simple in theory, but the great thing about this is you can rock up to your toe, you can push forward, you can push out to the side a little bit. You can really start to get a bit of range of movement through the actual ankle and the foot itself, which is really, really nice. And the cool thing about this is you can actually start to see that if there's a difference from left to right. And, you know, even just looking and feeling that there, my left side is actually a lot tighter. So as you're warming up, you're going, okay, well, great. My right side feels all right, but my left side is definitely tighter. And if that's the side that you have knee pain on, you know, you probably need to spend a little bit more time there. But the ankle is one really, really good spot. Now, you can actually add as well, if you want to progress it, you can actually add some weight onto it as well and help you just get a little bit of a deeper stretch and actually force a little bit more range. But the reality is you probably don't need to, but can be a helpful tool at times. Now, the next thing that you want to look at is making sure that you've got enough space at the back of the hip so that when you're hinging and when you're squatting, you can actually access that range to get into the positions that you need. Now, the incline bench pigeon stretch is fantastic. It's very comfortable. You can also focus on twisting your pelvis towards the side that you're mobilizing and then getting a really nice deep stretch and mobilization. But what I like to do is actually take that a step further, hold some weight, and then think about this hip pushing back. And then as I hinge over, let the weight pull myself down, and then a very active contraction up. So I'm actually starting to load this hip mobility through range. And you can feel when you get to the bottom here, it actually really starts to tighten up. You get a really nice big stretch in the back of the hip. So it's one way that you can keep access and range into the back of the hip. Now, the next thing that we need to have a look at is the front of the hip. Often we get really, really tight at the hips. So when we go to hinge or we go to squat, it holds our weight forward and limits our ability to shift weight backwards and actually get that control from the back of the hip itself. Again, adding a lot of pressure to the actual knee itself to actually do movements. So the simple drill that we can do is a couch stretch. You can do so many variations of this with bands, without bands, on an incline bench. But what we want to do is focus on getting the rib cage down, getting that ab set, squeezing through the glute and starting to create some extension forward at the hip. So if you're looking side on there, we'd want to make sure that the leg's getting back behind the line of the body, and you're not doing it just by extending forward. You're keeping stacked so that you're actually getting that length from the actual quad and hip flexor in itself. Now, just to note, someone that's tight will often shift away from the tight point. So make sure that you're shifting the weight into the side that you're actual stretching, tuck the hips under, and then move forward from that position. Because often what happens is you don't even realize it, but when you're doing these mobility-based drills, you actually shift and move away from the tightness. Now think of it like this, right? The knee often is it just gets caught in the middle. So we need that hip range of movement and we need that ankle range of movement in order for the knee to be able to do what it's good at doing. And often it does too much. So what we need to do is make sure that we've got the available range in both joints, but then we need to actually start to layer in training exercises which then support the knee. So a big part of the knee is it's controlled largely by active muscle tension. So we need to make sure that we're training the quad in a way that's specific for knee stability and control, the hamstring, the calf in a way that actually supports the knee itself. Often if you think about like the fitness industry as a whole, we often do a lot of these really big exercises. We've got squats, we've got deadlifts, we've got RDLs, but often we don't focus on these smaller muscle groups which actually helps to provide stability at the knee itself. So I'm going to run you through in the next section some really, really helpful drills that you can have in your training program, whether you use it as a warm-up or as a prehab day or actual as exercises themselves, which help to build some stability and strength around the knee itself. When you start to add these in with the mobility stuff, that's when you start to get traction. You can push harder in your big lifts. Now, often the first step of training the knee, especially when it's really, really aggravated, is getting a pain-free window to work with. So isometrics are really helpful for allowing you to get into a state where you can get some constructive training in. So using a wall sit, now this variant may be a little bit hard for some people, but essentially start with the hip angle higher than 90 degrees and the leg or the foot specifically out in front of the knee. Now you would want to build this tolerance up to 30 to 60 seconds. Then get yourself down into a position that is more 90 at the knee and 90 at the hip itself. And you want to be able to do that, one, because it starts to build a really good muscle-mind connection with the actual quad itself. It's actually quite hard to do, but two, sometimes movements in themselves actually cause pain. So if you're very, very in an inflammation state where things just hurt and everything hurts, these actually then provide a window, an opportunity for you then to do exercise on top of that. So that might be half an hour, that may be 60 minutes. But having these at the start of your training programs really help to get you in the zone to be able to do other exercises. Now, I speak about it all the time, and we get so tight in the front of the hips here, and they're never that exposed to range of movement with load. We're constantly shortening them. Think about a squat, shorten, shorten, shorten. Even hinging into a deadlift, shortening. So some exposure where you actually get some length, some eccentric length, and stress and tension in the front of the hip there is super valuable. Now, this is restoring a little bit more of that, what we call length-tension relationship, where we're getting an even distribution of length between the quad and the actual hip flexor itself. Often it's holding, say, 70% of the tension in the top of the hip, and there's not much left for this bottom portion. So if we can then get some length in the top portion, you get a more even distribution between the top and the low portion of the actual knee itself. So these drills here, I like to use a dead ball or a medicine ball because it helps keep my abs engaged as well, because you don't want to just extend through the lower back. You actually want to stay stacked at the same time. So holding onto that ball at the front allows you to keep your glute engaged and then actually get some length through the front of that hip. So an area that's often common overlooked is the actual calf itself. Now, the big calf, the gastroc, actually crosses across the back of the knee. And then you've got a smaller soleus behind the ankle, behind that muscle there, that actually controls the ankle range of movement in itself. So if we're actually looking at the knee, think of them as an anchor that actually slows down movement of the knee moving forward, right? Makes sense. So we need to spend some time actually working on the calf itself. Doesn't have to be to build muscle mass as such, but it's to create stability to slow down movement of your knee moving forward. Now, this here, we want to train the knee in a bent position and in a straight knee position. So this drill here, now it doesn't look hard, but if you have a look at that movement itself, it's very specific to the soleus. And you can see there that I've got that shaking going on, which is showing me that my nervous system is actually learning and it's going, oh, these are positions that I need to get better at doing. Now, this is a very, very, very scaled back version. And you can see there at that end range there, my calf is involuntary shaking. That's not voluntary at all. And then if you come up here, you can play around with these top positions. But what we want to do, again, same as the hip flexors, we want to start to take the lower limb through these loaded eccentric movements. Sometimes we miss the whole point of these exercises when we actually then go into, say, a seated calf raise machine. Then what we want to do, and again, this looks simple in theory, but we want to actually then start to load up the calf, because this is the one that's actually going to, in a straight leg position, is going to slow down the movement of the knee going forward. Now, this here, in theory, is simple, but if you have a look at it, that big stretch at the bottom and that big squeeze at the top, we often miss when we do like standing calf raises. So we want to get really good at these positions so we've got this really strong mind-muscle connection with the calf itself. Now, the next big group of muscles that we want to focus on is the distal hamstring, the bit behind the actual knee itself. Think about it. We don't actually stress it that much in a lot of training. Athletic development do a really good job of it, but strength training, the active lifters, we don't really train that. At best, we may do some hamstring curls, which is good, but it doesn't really expose the knee, specifically the hamstring, to stresses in these lengthened positions. Now, I'm going to run you through a very simple bridge drill here because it starts to train the hamstring component in a lengthened position. But there's so many variations that you can do here. You can do Swiss ball curls, you can do variations on a 45-degree back extension or a GHD that start to stress the hamstring isometrically. But the thing that I like about this exercise is the fact that my shoulders are in a fixed position and my foot's in a fixed position. Closed chain movements are really, really, really good for getting stabilization. So if we come down here and we push up to that top there, you can see with my knee, it's got a slight bend in it, but right now, all that tension is actually through the back of my hamstring. Yes, I'm getting some glute, but really what I'm getting is that distal hamstring. I'm starting to expose myself to that stress in that lengthened position. Now, I would be doing very high reps of these. Once isometrically, you can hold that position for a period of time. If you can say hold that for 30, 60 seconds, then I would add some sets and reps into it. Once you get really, really good at that, then we can start to actually add some range into it. But before we get to range, we may progress it in isometrically first in a GHD, like I was saying before, or a back extension. Now, the next thing you want to do is expose the top of the hip here to that extended position with load. Now, a front foot elevated split squat will allow you to essentially keep that back leg locked into extension, keep that glute locked in, and get that range under load. Now, yes, we're working the front leg, but really the purpose of this one here is to get that extension through the back hip. The exposure to that extension in the back hip is actually going to strengthen up over time, and the front of that hip will get less tight as a result because it's constantly exposed to these lengthened positions, not just shortened positions. Now, the next thing we want to do is get the quad, the hamstring, the glute, and the midsection torso all communicating, working together. So essentially we're targeting the distal quad like a leg extension, but we're doing it more so in a way that gets a lot more muscle recruitment from a stabilization standpoint. Remember here, this isn't about hypertrophy. This is about stability and control at the knee so that then we can use that stability to get more hypertrophy, to get more strength, right? Like it's getting the prep work, the foundation for you to grow. So from here, this is called a Peterson step up. So up on your toe, and then we're going to shift weight from, in this video, my supporting leg on the ground into the one that's on the step. And the goal here is, you can see there, they got a bit shaky. The goal here is to then get better at coordinating my quad, my hamstring, and my glute working together. And you can see this is what we often call triple extension, where the knee, the hip, and the ankle is all working together, getting nice and tall, but I'm getting all of the activation of the tissue surrounding the knee itself. Now to wrap up the knee, often it's just trapped in the middle of the hip and the ankle. And a lot of the exercises that we do in the gym and a lot of the postures that we do day to day don't actually support good hip range of movement, which means by default, the knee just becomes a problematic point for a lot of us. So the drills that I've run through today really is to expose the hip to range of movement in a loaded way. Now there's obviously a lot of variations we can do, but it's a very good start point. Getting some range of movement in the ankle, but then looking at how we can actually use exercises in our training program, whether it's a warm-up, whatever it may be, a prehab day, it doesn't really matter. As long as it's in the program, they're there and they're in there to essentially create a bit of stability around the knee itself. Then sometimes we need to add a layer of isometrics that gives us a bit of a pain-free window. So we do that and we load that at the front of these exercises. Once we get into a bit of a flow where we've got good range of movement, we can access the knee and we can train it, then we really want to start to build some muscle mass on the quad itself. We really want big distal quads, but often we can't access it because of pain. So we need to work on the smaller components first: distal hamstring, distal quad, range of movement at the hip, and then getting them to work and coordinate together so that over time you get a lot more robust and you can get a lot more pain-free training in. That's the key here, because at the end of the day, we want to be spending time on strength. We want to be building muscle mass, but often there's a limitation and there's nothing more frustrating. So use this as a guide to get you back to doing what you want to do. And just remember that, like, once the pain subsides, keep this stuff in the mix, because often what happens is it's out of sight, out of mind, and it creeps back in as the volume or the intensity starts to build back up.